I mean, I think several reasons, but you've got obviously bottom line issues. You know, returns are expensive, they cost money. There's also the customer service aspect to it, because basically as people who buy products, people say often that they look at the returns policy before they buy a product from a particular retailer. So it's important in terms of customer service that retailers understand what customers want, what their needs are, and what they'll do with products. So there's bottom line issues, there's customer expectations, there's customer service, which are really quite important. And this is in an area that's retailers having difficulties at the moment due to lots of issues. Margins are low. There's issues around bricks and mortar. There's issues around online. So the whole area of returns is pretty vital, really, because it can turn a profit-making organisation into one which is not making sufficient profits to be sustainable.
What do you think, Lisa?
I would agree with that, and particularly because it turns out, particularly from the research we did, that calculating a cost of returns to the business is a non-trivial problem. You have costs across a number of different activities and divisions of the organisation. People underestimate the amount of overhead cost that gets involved, particularly with online returns. You've got a whole infrastructure behind that of IT, of warehousing, of transport, of staffing, and the cost builds up very quickly, but it's very difficult to isolate. So one of the roles of the management accounting is, yes, to be part of a team, but also to do that, bring all that data together and turn it into something that gives us the information we need to be able to manage the returns issues that we face.
One of the key things about management accounting, we're not talking about recording something, we're trying to influence what's happening. So actually, if we get involved in the processes, how can we add value to processes? How do we measure the impact of that value? That's actually driving change rather than just reacting to things. So I think this is a key aspect for management accounting.
One of the interesting things we're finding, and we're still in the process of looking at this, is that there's interesting cost patterns going on. There's something slightly different going on. And I don't think many retailers and organisations have yet got their mind around it.
One of the real challenges for returns management, as Lisa said, is the fact that it actually operates across the organisation and across the supply chain. So when you're actually looking at managing or identifying costs across the supply, it's not just about costs in little boxes, it's about costs across the supply chain. And that's critical, and that's where management accounting techniques can really help. You know, there are a whole range of techniques which are useful. It could involve quality costing, forms of activity-based costing, value management. I mean, a whole range of techniques.
Yeah. And I think there's also, it's just bringing things to the light and giving people attention to things that people don't appreciate. And one of the things that we really pulled up that people hadn't thought about is to be able to offer a return service, you have to have the system in place, whether or not the return actually happens. So we took just an €89 garment, I should say, and our estimate is you need at least €3 of that income is going to go towards having the system in place just in case the item is returned. So, you know, it's not a cheap proposition.
One retailer we're talking to talked about the notion of dynamic reason codes. So actually, if you can quickly identify what's wrong, so say there is, you know, this dress seems to have been returned a lot, and people are always saying it's because of the size seems a bit odd, and it may be that there's been some functional problem earlier on in terms of sizing. So if you can get to that issue very early, you can then you can stop that process and then correct it. And I think that's quite crucial. And again, as Lisa said, you know, that's about understanding the returns processes, but actually doing something about it. It's not just saying, oh, we've got these returns, let's just put them to one side. You're actually saying, why have we got these returns? And accountants, as part of a bigger group, can be very much engaged in that. There's a pattern to this. The pattern means that we need to do something about it. Otherwise, we're going to get lots and more returns of the same product.
And in fact, that's quite a lot of the accounting work we found was going on, is actually, if you like, drilling down to find out which products, which stores were having issues. So the main use of the data at the moment is to identify where the problems are and to address them. And then it may be reported upwards if it's quite a serious or it's a cross-business function. But that's the point where the accountants engage with the buyers and the store managements and the divisional areas. We found that actually, yes, there was good work going on trying to identify the cost of returns, but quite a lot of the accounting work at the moment was used to identify where there were problems. And the other one was a lot of reconciliation. And I'll give you one simple problem. If you allow people to buy online and on a guest account, and they get a refund, and they can send back the item in any way they like, and people are not always good about sending the right paperwork back, we found that accountants were spending quite a lot of time every week trying to reconcile inventory and refunds made. What you really want them to be doing is working in the cross-functional teams and coming up with ways of generating income and minimising cost. But there was, at the moment, what we find is there's quite a lot of accounting work in just firefighting. So that's something that could change, but the accountants certainly have the ability to add quite a lot of value into that system as part of a cross-functional team. And that was happening as well, but there were all these other accounting tasks on hand at the same time. Of course, and they proliferated the more returns you get, and therefore the cost to the organisation of all that accounting work is also a hidden cost of the returns. There are a number. I can identify two, and I'm pretty sure they came up on John's project as well. The first one, I think, is about environmental issues, because particularly with online returns, you're creating a lot more transport costs, a lot more packing and repacking costs. People don't tend to appreciate the number of journeys that are being taken in order to manage the returns process. That all has an environmental impact, and not to mention what you do with the products that are returned. So can you put them back into some sort of circular economy, or are they being wasted? Now we all know there's inventory waste anyway, but there are evident. It means, well, there are 6 R's and I can never remember them all. We're talking about things like, is the product being recycled? Is it being repurposed? Is it being resold? In other words, it's something happening to give it more of a life than it just being thrown away. I think the other social issue is a bit harder to pull apart, because the offering of free returns and the building up, there's something social going on. There's changing patterns of consumer behaviour. There's changing expectations about what you can and can't do between companies. It's about the relationship that a customer has with a company. And that has a subtle effect on the way society thinks about, well, the obligations they have to other people. Now, I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out, but all we can say from our research is there seems to be some changing behaviours. And again, that's an interesting area some of our colleagues are looking at. Can we understand that changing behaviour in society? It may be positive, it may be negative. At the moment, we're just trying to understand it.
I think the other thing is, which is really interesting, the idea, the returns levels at the moment are quite high, but equally the number of retailers who are closing down creates a social issue, because if we can't manage returns in a sustainable way, people are going to lose their jobs. Now other organisations may pick those up, but actually they're picked up in a different way. So if bricks and mortar shops go, there's going to be a different kind of workforce engaged with returns. So I think socially that's quite important as well, actually. And in fact, I think it was on the BBC yesterday that retail's had its worst performance for 25 years. Now there's some debate about some of the data in that, but it's quite staggering actually. In an era when you would expect continuous growth in something, there's been the lowest, for 25 years, and that's socially very important. And if retailers have got high returns costs which they aren't managing appropriately, etc., because they don't understand them, that's going to lead to companies going under.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's socially, very difficult.
Okay.
We looked at developing this toolkit, which covered the whole range of what we considered to be, well, not what we considered to be, what the co-produced Discussants over a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, what were the key best practices across the supply chain, within the accounting aspects of that, what performance measurement systems were in place, what were the best retailers doing, what was the best relationship between retailers and manufacturers. So our particular approach, and we included costing systems within that, but our particular approach was to look across the whole spectrum, including things, that the relation to totes and a whole range of things. So we were looking across the supply chain with a view. The original, it's interesting because we're talking about the environmental impact. Originally, funding came from the Department for Transport to look at the environmental impact, and this goes back to 2005, the environmental impact of all these lorries buzzing around with half-empty lorries, with these returns and things like that. So that was the original driving force. As we actually got into the work, people were thinking more about, well, how do we improve the bottom line? And the toolkit was then developed to look at, well, how do you improve the bottom line, but how do you do that through all these different processes? And what we've also done then is work with companies using that toolkit, using the new toolkit, to actually look at their processes, see how we can change processes with a view to both increasing customer satisfaction, increasing the number of customers using, going to our retail outlets, or whether that be internet or bricks and mortar.